Good morning, everybody. Today I want to talk about freedom, but particularly what this government, this regime in the UK is doing to undermine freedom and put in place what I call the infrastructure of tyranny. And it's been done very, very subtly and by stealth, little bits here and there, so people can't really understand what's going on unless you take a wide-ranging view and put all the dots together. And then you see they're constructing a legal framework by which our freedom will have gone fundamentally and society will have changed completely from what it was 10 years ago or so when they finished the program. So over the last 2 years especially, they've put in place laws, or they are putting in place laws, which are going to undermine our freedom. Now, of course, we all know about the Coronavirus Act, which for 2 years totally undermined all of our human rights that we thought we had. You know, we signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights, which is supposed to safeguard our human rights. And that was put in place in 1950. It's a good convention. There's problems with all the case law that's come from Strasbourg since then, but it was written by British lawyers to help a continent ravaged by National Socialism and tyranny. So the actual convention, is based on English law and the good things in English law, such as the Bill of Rights and Magna Carta and so on down the years. What hasn't happened is that this government in this country and other governments in other countries have not respected the articles in the European Convention of Human Rights and have just completely trampled all over them with emergency legislation such as the Coronavirus Act in the UK, thus proving that it isn't really worth the paper it's written on, because the government can just make up an act like that, and no one has really had the power to do much about it initially, although over 2 years we did push back as the people and were successful in pushing back, particularly in the UK, which was incredible because at the time they wanted to introduce a fourth lockdown, which would still be going on now if they'd have had their way, but there was such a pushback at the same time when all of the parties that they went to were exposed, showing that the people who were trying to implement draconian regulations because of a so-called deadly virus were not afraid of the deadly virus themselves and were breaking all of the rules they'd made up themselves on social distancing and mask wearing, etc., etc. But anyway, the specific laws that they're putting in place in the UK, I think there's 3 of them, and there's also a treaty. So let's just talk briefly about each one. So first of all, you've got the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Act, which came into power, I think it was a couple of years ago, 2020, may have been 2019. What that does is it allows agents of the state to break the law in the act of enforcing the law. And if you are a victim of a crime that an agent of the state has carried out in order to gain or gather intelligence or do the bidding of the state, you have no recompense against them, either criminally or civilly, because they are immune from prosecution. They're allowed to break the law with impunity in order to carry out their orders. Now, this is very, very dangerous because this again tramples completely all of our human rights, because human rights are supposed to prevent the state from acting in a way which is detrimental to individual people and citizens in society. What this says is that an agent of the state can spy on you, they can take your data, they can harm you. Some of them in the past have even been known to start relationships, start families with people that they are surveilling and gathering intelligence on, so that they can spy on them. This is absolutely appalling. This should not be happening anywhere. But this is now, this was a big scandal when this came out. We know police have done this. Agents of the state have done this in the past. And, they've actually been, I think, convicted of rape in some cases, because they shouldn't be starting a relationship and a family with someone and pretending to be someone's, boyfriend, girlfriend, then wife and husband, simply because they're spying on them. But this is what they do. That would be completely illegal to anyone's mind in a normal circumstance. But now that is fine. there will be no criminal charges to anybody who does that. So people who do this, working on behalf of the state, are now free to go ahead and do that without any fear whatsoever of breaking the law. When actually, you know, they have broken the law and they have broken human rights. But this is, again, what the government is doing and making law in statute, which is wrong. That law is so wrong, it needs to go. You know, they could even torture someone under the letter of that law, and it would be legal, even though torture is against our fundamental human rights. In every single convention and act and understanding of human rights, the state is not allowed to harm or torture anybody, but then they would be allowed to do that under the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Act. So wrong. That's the first one. The second one is what's just come into force at the end of April. This is the Police Crime Courts and Sentencing Act. And there was a lot of talk and controversy about this as it was going through Parliament. The thing is, it's a huge, sprawling act that's not about one thing. It's about 2,000 different things. And it mixes good things with bad things. You know, so for example, you know, landowners are now allowed to get the police, or the police are now allowed to remove big encampments of travellers on private land, which was a nuisance before. Okay, so that's fine, without actually impinging on individuals' right to roam, because you're still allowed to, you know, roam on land without a vehicle. So that's a good thing. But where it's really bad is what it's done in terms of protests and removing the right to protest and much higher sentences if the police deem that they don't want a protest happening. And this has all been set up. We've had freedom protests which have been entirely peaceful and for the benefit of the country and our fundamental freedoms. The police have gone in with the TSG units with their helmets and batons drawn and absolutely with utter New World Order brutality, beating up protesters, arresting them, fining them, dragging them off to jail. But then you've got Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter, Insulate Britain, all funded by these organisations, globalist organisations, Soros Foundation, etc., etc. They are acting on behalf of the state, and they are supported by the state and most of the political parties. You can see that. They love what they're doing because they are pushing the critical race theory agenda, the climate alarmist agenda, but they're also making loads and loads of disruption in order to create a problem which there will then be a reaction to that will then allow the solution of this new law to come in that actually then stops and puts huge restrictions on legitimate protest. But the target of this is not the Extinction Rebellion. Yeah, this is all a setup. The target of this are peaceful freedom protesters, and in the future, if there is any kind of shortages and so on, it will be people protesting against shortages, against economic policy, for perhaps, or against war in Eastern Europe, perhaps. There will be protests about that in the future, which will be against the narrative, not with the narrative like Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion, but protests that are against the narrative, which are largely peaceful. They will have the power to decimate those protests and drag everybody off to prison because they've introduced a new offence of statutory public nuisance with up to 10 years in prison. But what does that mean? That could just be someone making some noise or banging a drum or shouting, which happens in protests. Okay, I don't like lots of noise myself, But in central London, particularly, those are areas where people have been protesting for hundreds of years, and they should have the right to continue protesting for hundreds of more years, thousands of more years. That is a fundamental freedom we have and a right we have in this country. And now the government's made this statutory offence which allows the police to stop protests which have had the right to go on before. And we're not talking about people blocking the public highway. That was already an offence. They've upped the sentence for that. Okay, so that's, perhaps I would agree with that, from £1,000 maximum sentence, maximum fine, to 6 months in prison for deliberately blocking the public highway. Okay, fair enough. Normal freedom protesters don't do that. They're in Trafalgar Square or in Parliament Square, not blocking the roads. But you've got all these Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter people, they're deliberately blocking the roads, Extinction Rebellion particularly, for days and days on end, making a nuisance, making a problem. But this is all a setup in order to bring this in. And normies who just about got that lockdowns were bad after about 2 years are going hook, line and sinker for this. Oh yeah, there's a problem. Isn't this great? We've got this bill that's going to stop Extinction Rebellion from protesting. Well, it's not going to stop them from protesting. It is just going to allow bigger sentences for them. But if the police really want to stop something, they'll go in and stop it anyway. You know, the not having the Police Crime and Courts and Sentencing Act hasn't stopped them from acting with utter brutality towards freedom protesters or people who were defending the statue of Winston Churchill after it was defaced, rather than the people who were defacing it or throwing the Colston statue into the harbour in Bristol, where some of the police there, their response was absolutely pathetic. So that's the second piece of legislation that's just gone through. The third piece that's coming up is the online safety bill, and that is being sold as something we need to protect children. But children are protected anyway. If people, you got all these anti-indecency laws. People who do these things can be found and put in jail already if you send sort of information to children and so on, which is indecent and so on. And parents are the ones that should be stopping their children from having unsupervised access to the internet. It's the job of parents to do that, not the state. So this is another problem I was going to talk about. But the more the state tries to take the role of the parent, the less the parents will do, and then actually that's going to cause more problems. What the state should do is saying, it's your job. It's not our job to bring up your kids. Parents, it's your job. You make sure your kids do not go on social media unsupervised. You make sure your kids don't go on the internet without you looking and being able to track and see what they do. And you need to protect them from all of this content that's out there. But what this online safety bill, it will really do, it's being sold like this, even though it isn't really going to do much about it, because anyone could just get a VPN and sort of circumvent controls in this country if they wanted to. I mean, most teenagers know how to do that anyway. But what it will do is you're going to have new crimes of spreading misinformation and disinformation, which is a word we've just started to hear over the last 2 years, particularly with respect to injections and so on. Who decides what's misinformation and disinformation? These are all vague terms that are not defined. Essentially, it will be anything the government doesn't like, anything that doesn't fit the mainstream narrative. If you disagree with the narrative, for example, you question injections, you question what's happening in Ukraine and so on, then you might be accused of spreading misinformation and then fined or even jailed for having the wrong opinion. So this is really like a communist style um, rule and law to bring in censorship and punishments for opinions, which should not be happening anywhere in the world, let alone Britain, the UK, which is supposed to be the bastion of freedom. And you get all these politicians, they're sickening. They talk about we're defending freedom and democracy while completely undermining freedom and democracy all the time. So this is the big problem with the online safety bill. It's going to do that. And it's also going to require social media platforms to remove speech that's considered legal but harmful. Again, who decides what's legal but harmful? If it's legal, it should be allowed. No question. If it's illegal, remove it. And then you take them to court and they can go before a jury, and then you can decide whether the content they put on is illegal, and there should be a penalty for that. But if something is legal but harmful, this could be things that, again, people just don't like, or people find offensive, or even, again, opinions about injections, opinions about these face things. I'm being careful with my words here. I don't say certain words too often on this platform because of the algorithm, and I get demonetized and banned if you say certain things. That's you see, censorship's already here, but this online safety bill would make it a legal requirement, not just something that platforms do of their own volition. So all of these things together are putting in place the infrastructure of tyranny. Added to that, the World Health Organization Pandemic Preparedness Treaty, which is coming. I made a whole other video about that a month ago or so, and it's good that more people are starting to talk about that now and realize what is going to be happening in the WHO summit coming up at the end of this month. What we need is a Freedom Act, and the Heritage Party, which I lead, of course, is the only party that is saying we're going to have a Freedom Act. And what the Freedom Act will do is not do anything new, but it will just get rid of all of these laws that have been put in place by this regime and previous regimes which undermine our freedom. So going all the way back to the Public Health Act 1984, the Civil Contingencies Act, the Equalities Act Section 1449, the Communications Act 2003 Section 123, the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Act, the Police, Crime, Courts and Sentencing Act, the Online Safety Bill, which will soon be an act, the World Health Organization Pandemic Preparedness Treaty, the articles of the Coronavirus Act, which haven't ended after 2 years. There's 4 of those articles which continue on, and so on. That's 9 things that I can think of that need to be repealed so that we re-establish our fundamental freedoms, which we have the understanding under common law that we have, and we have the inalienable and inexorable right to exercise. That is freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom to protest, freedom to trade, freedom of expression, freedom of religion and religious belief, and all of these things. And none of them should be restricted by statute law, which has come on gradually, bit by bit by bit over the last 30 years or so, but has accelerated with this Johnson regime and the situation of the last 2 years. We need a Freedom Act, which we will do as a matter of priority if we have the chance in Parliament to do, and then we will re-establish our freedoms and sweep away all of these New World Order, WEF, CFR, and so on, organisations behind them, all of their programme. We will sweep it away and re-establish the freedoms we have under common law. So if you like that, please come and join me in the Heritage Party. Get involved. You can just be a member, and everyone who joins the Heritage Party supports me, supports the people who are out the front, putting their heads above the parapets, being candidates and so on. So you can do that. Or, if you join, you can also put your head above the parapet yourself and start to speak out and be a candidate. And that's great. But, even if you just join, you're helping us to have a bigger voice and to carry on speaking out for what needs to be done to restore our heritage in the UK. And I hope that if we restore that here, we are a key country in the world, and that will help other nations around the world to restore their freedom and their heritage as well, and defeat the New World Order. Okay, thanks for listening, everyone. God bless you all.